Okay. Question is, should county employees have paid or unpaid leave for 2 or 3 days during times of declining county government revenues?
Well, that's sort of a generic question, but I think it's really a specific question about the recent budget negotiations. The first thing I think about our contracts, our county employee contracts, is that it's critical for the county executive to negotiate agreements that we can fund. And he needs to send the council and agreements that they're bought into and that everyone is in general agreement are sustainable over the long term. And there's been a lot of difficulty in the recent years because there were agreements made, particularly in the past council, that were just unsustainable. The county government increased its rate of spending by 11% in 2004, 11% again in 2005, and then 14% in 2006. So you can imagine by 2006, that 14% increase was coming on top of a budget that was more than 120% larger than it had been 2 years before. And those agreements were long-term agreements. And they were premised on the idea that revenues from the good times were going to keep going forever. And we all know that the revenues have shrunken dramatically. And our tax base here is a lot more fragile than we thought. And it was based on a bubble economy, and the bubble has burst. So we have to do for ourselves now, and renegotiating contracts is going to be an important part of it. The specific issue of the leave, I don't think it was a wise choice by the county executive, and I think the council, did the right thing to push back on that. But generally speaking, I think we need a more collaborative environment so that the agreements that come, they have the buy-in in advance, and that we can have one voice for our county as we struggle with some very difficult issues. There's a lot of criticism about the strength of unions in our county. I think we need strong elected officials who can work together in a real spirit of collaboration. That's the answer. So I ask for your support. Thank you.
Our next candidate is Mark Elridge.
This was a really difficult decision the council had to make, but I thought all of us agreed that if we're going to lay off people instead of laying off a small group of people for a large number of days, we should have shared that burden over all the county employees. And I really thought that we had the opportunity, if the school system had participated, frankly, it would have been a day and a half for every employee in terms of furloughs. And I'm really sorry that we weren't able to get all the unions together to reach some understanding that we're all in this together and that everybody has to make a sacrifice together. I think in the long term, we really have to look at a different negotiating format. We're in a situation now where the county executive negotiates. He never comes back to the council. He doesn't have to, and say what you're thinking about the budget, what you're thinking about what you're going to be able to fund, and he negotiates a contract and it's passed over to us to vote on. And what you lose in this is not just you have to make a vote on this totally, but as somebody who did this at a municipal level, when we gave our city administrator the negotiating authority, but they came back to the council every 2 weeks and said, this is what the unions are asking for, this is what we think we need, and we were able to give guidance to the direction of the contract. The council never sees what the unions gave. We only see what was taken. There is absolutely no public process to this, and the council's left with it's a vote up or down. I would like to see the process changed so that the council's part of the process. So the executive has to walk over and says, I'm your negotiator. Where are you guys going to go with taxes next year? What's the overall framework for the budget? Can you afford 8% over each year for the next 3 years? Most of us I think would say, you're out of your mind. I think that this is the kind of discussion we've got to have. If we don't change the process, we're going to continue with this disconnect. He makes a deal, then we've got to figure out whether we can fund it or break it. It's not good for anybody. It's not fair to the unions. It's not fair to the taxpayers. And it's not fair to us. You have to figure out what's the right balance.
Thank you. Next candidate is George Leventhal.
So all county employees are taking furloughs this year. It depends on the amount of their salary, whether they take 3 days, 5 days, or 8 days. All county council members will take furloughs, the county executive will take furloughs. Pay was frozen before the furloughs were imposed. There was no cost of living increase, there was no in-grade step increase, and it's extremely likely that pay will continue to be frozen for several years to come. So public employees are making significant sacrifices. When I was elected to office, the most frequent refrain that I heard was that we aren't paying our teachers, firefighters, and policemen enough to enable them to live in this county. And we made a judgment over some period of time, not we. The contracts that were negotiated by the superintendent and school board and by the county executive were based, as Hans said correctly, on two assumptions. First of all, that revenues were likely to continue rising because this was an affluent, successful county. And secondly, that we wanted to attract the very best public employees, the very best teachers in the region, and that we wanted to fairly and generously compensate people who put their lives on the line, firefighters and police officers, and that we wanted to continue to be decent to people who work for us, bus drivers, social workers, nurses. That was the management policy in place during the period of time when compensation increased above the rate of inflation. We cannot continue to increase compensation above the rate of inflation, and we will not. It is clear to all council members, all of us who unanimously voted to freeze pay and impose furloughs, that the nature of the relationship between county government and its employees has to change, and it is changing. My hope is that we will continue to respect the principle and the process of collective bargaining. But for collective bargaining to work, it does require muscular bargaining on the part of the executive. It does require that that person or people who are on the side of the table representing the taxpayer actually negotiate and drive a hard bargain. That has not always happened in the past.
Thank you. Next candidate is Becky Wagner.
In my 40 years here in the county, I've enjoyed the respect and trust of many different people. And it's the trust aspect of this that is most troubling to me. I don't believe that when a firefighter comes through a window and saves your child or your mother, or when a police officer protects you from a dangerous situation, that you think that that person is being paid too much. I think that the negotiation process isn't productive because it's become a media shout-out. We cannot have a negotiator, for example, in our county executive, working with the superintendent and have 9 different voices from the county council shouting what they would or wouldn't do. Similarly, the county council has the responsibility to look at the projections that come from the county executive regarding revenues and say, wait a minute, we can't afford this. This is what I do at Interfaith Works. I make a budget, I get my revenue, I cannot spend money that I don't have. And the county council has that responsibility. The devil didn't make anybody do anything. The council members and the county executive have the responsibility to be strong negotiators. George is right. But they also have the responsibility to be fair and to be able to say they can be trusted for their word.
The last candidate for this question is Fred Evans.
In 1974, I served on the negotiations team with the Montgomery County Education Association as a teacher. So I was very directly involved in the process between the school board and the Teachers Association as a member of that, the give and take. And those of you who haven't been in Montgomery County for a while know that there was a teacher strike or maybe you don't know, there was a teacher strike in 1968, which gave rise to the bargaining law agreement that was passed by the state in 1970. So I've been involved in that side of the process. I've also been involved in the process of working with agencies and different groups in the school system as I worked my way to become a principal of a high school. I'm in favor of collective bargaining, the collective bargaining process, because I think it can be a fair and equitable one and puts parties at the table that need to be at the table. However, if the process and when the process isn't working, my question to the current county council is why wasn't the so-called discussion going on prior to the fix that we've just gotten into? And to say that the county executive is the bargainer, which is true in terms of the county workers, we are the funding agency, I thought, the county council, so we should be making, as I think Becky was saying, I don't want to put words in her mouth, I think Becky was saying, we should be making statements ahead of time and not behind the time about what is affordable and what is not. To have one group of employees who suffered the burden of this is, I think, incorrect. I think it should have been across the board. But that is hindsight and not foresight. I think we need to have more foresight and have those questions talked about right now rather than after the process.